Hey, everybody, welcome to Rage and Love, where we passionately debate, explore, and review topics about religion, science, history, and current events. I have two really awesome guests today, the lovely Richard Gilliver and J.R. Warren. Hello, guys. Uh, so, just a warning, I guess, for everybody. Richard and J.O. don't know each other. Like, I have done shows with both of them separately, and it was my impression that it would be a really good conversation to have with both of them about consciousness and philosophy, since you're both so interested in the topic, and me as well. I Richard and I have done, what is it now, like 10 hours of videos worth of consciousness. and, and every time I learn a lot, and I really, really enjoy the conversation. And I'm always up for learning more about philosophy. I'm a complete newbie at philosophy. Like, please take it easy on me if I don't get the correct terminology. I'll let you, the professionals, or at least more experienced people than myself, do all the talking about that. So, Jo, tell us a little bit, like a quick, where can people find you, what you do, and that stuff.
Hi everyone. I am JL. For those who are not familiar, I run the channel Bridge the Divide, which focuses on science communication, theology, philosophy, a number of other topics, in a way to try and use education, rationality, and reason to bridge the societal divides that are often created by general ignorance in these fields. And so, I try to approach these topics as with an intellectual honesty and push that as much as I can, because I recognize that individuals with extremely disparate worldviews can coexist, so long as we recognize where we're coming at and if we're being as intellectually honest as possible. So, but I address many topics on my channel and have debated a few individuals as well. So yeah, I'm if you want to say philosophically speaking, I'm a methodological naturalist when it comes down to it, and I'm a pretty staunch empiricist. So my philosophy of truth is pretty rigid, but there's a lot of different fields that we can get into. So we're looking forward to this. Thank you.
Awesome. We'll do that. How about you, Richard?
Yeah, I host Talk Heathen on the ACA network, and I've done various other things over the years. I've been talking to people I'm very old, and I've been talking to people all together for about 35 years. So I've got a bit of experience in this. I very much, I want to get good, honest conversations, and I think the internet is a two-edged sword for that, because you get a lot of the apologists coming out of the woodwork, and there are a lot of good people who really want really good conversations as well. One of the biggest things I'm interested in is getting people just to understand that, and this is where I have most of my disagreements with atheists as well. A lot of atheists don't understand philosophy as much as they like to pretend they do. They don't understand rationality as much as they pretend to do. And hopefully, I want to try and get later in the show, if we have time, onto the subject of ghosts a little bit, because I've got a lot of experience in that area. And one of the things that's really important for me to push, and this is why I love people who experienced ghosts or think they've experienced ghosts so much, is because all that is doing, it's a really kind of hyper focused spotlight of how everybody's brain works every day. So it really kind of like rubs me up the wrong way, where when atheists and people who don't believe in the supernatural start kind of having a go at people who've had these experiences as though they are being irrational, because it is the mistake, it is the cognitive mistakes that our brains make every day that is happening to them, and it's just a hyper kind of focused way of it happening. And we have it, I have it, you have it, everybody has these cognitive mistakes all the time. And I think it's really, really important for people to kind of get that mindset that, we're not dealing with people who are different to us. I hate worldview comparisons. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later as well. But I hate worldview comparisons, because we're all living the same reality, and it's important to start from that point, I think.
I have some thoughts there. I'm a little bit stricter. There's a line that I draw at a certain point. I recognize where you're coming from and the starting position, and coming from that with that kind of like that equal evaluation. But there's a line. I personally hold that there's a line to be drawn when it comes from an epistemological standpoint. When individuals begin claiming that their subjective internal experience is directly reflective of external reality without any kind of methodology behind that, I view it that current society that exists is too much in this well of that which emotionally validates you is more likely to be true than that which can be confirmed, through through methodology and reasoning, and that which is in accordance with reason and logic. And so when we put one value over when we put that emotional validation over like that, people may feel better. There may be a short-term positive utility, but you're going to wind up with mass conflict when you have a bunch of people in large groups, a lot of people in large groups, all claiming that what they're feeling is the right thing. And then how do you get to what is actually the case? So I think epistemology and our dedication to it, to having a consistent epistemic framework throughout our worldview, is so important, because that lack of epistemology is the reason we have the conflicts that we do today. So I think I take kind of like a hard stance. It's like, sure, you have your experiences, you have your subjective internal experience. That's great. But can we evaluate these things beyond however it serves you? And I think we should be able to do that. People should be more open to that. That's kind of where I go on my channel.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into Richard. Like he and I have talked a little bit about before. Like he used to be a ghost hunter. So we'll get on that. We'll get on that topic. Don't freak out, Joe. Don't.
No. I love it because I'm sure he's familiar with, obviously, Ghost Hunters that was on the Sci-Fi Channel way back in the day, and with Jason Hawes, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but that show started out as a debunking show. They would go into places that were purportedly haunted, and they would wind up debunking it by explaining how electromagnetism and the electromagnetic fields like this could generate these effects and play into people's senses of dread and stuff like that. But then because sci-fi wanted ghosts, they twisted the show into something, let's go find them, and now they started fabricating. It was really, really bad, but it started out great. I was like, this is fantastic, a debunking show, this is great. But
yeah, then they had to keep the viewers, right?
They had to keep the viewers, because people, you keep reinforcing, oh, these things don't exist. They keep debunking every place they go into. So I was like, but we want ghosts. So there you go.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
Ghosts
before we get into that, we'll definitely get into the topic. But Richard, before we started, I see Ascalon is in the chat, and he asked me to pass 2 messages. The first one, and I'm gonna read them because I don't want to mistake the wording. Your tap water is shite.
Okay.
That was the first one. I don't know anything behind it.
I agree.
Don't hurt the messenger. All right, good. And the second one, he says to ask you to say it isn't in the tin with your Yorkshire accent.
I knew that was coming because I get this every single time on any show that Ascalon is watching. Tin, tin, tin. There you go.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for doing that for the shits and jigs, I guess.
I'll always be Ascalon's dancing monkey. Don't worry.
Yeah. Oh, you were mentioning that when you met him in person, you said him let's tell Jail about it.
Yeah. He's Ascalon is a lovely guy. I've met him in real life. I happen to know that he does not like physical contact with people. So I got my daughter, who was 9 at the time. I said, when you see him, you must run up to him and give him the biggest hug that you can. As soon as she saw, she ran running across her. This was I think it was in the Museum of Scotland. Pretty sure we were there. So it was a busy, crowded public place. She just ran over, threw her arms around him and gave him the biggest hug. And I've never seen somebody look so uncomfortable in my life. It was great. I had great fun. I will be eating off that story for the rest of my life.
He needs to start carrying a stick and like to whack people in the head who attempt to say to your daughter, chew on tinfoil.
Ouch.
Yeah, that's funny. One day I shall travel across the pond and visit all of you over there on the other side.
So that's tough for me
Oh,
because I'm a hugger. When I meet people, I'm a bear hugger. That's what I do.
I am
So,
also a hugger.
yeah.
yeah, same with me. When we do in person events, I'm always up for like, hey, I try to remember to ask people, like, hey, can I give you a hug rather than just like walking up to them with wide open arms, like expecting it.
See, that's my problem is I get excited when I meet people. And like I kind of like and when I met Forrest Valkai, I was like I almost did. Even though I was like oh no, I gotta be professional. And I shook his hand. I was like, okay, but I dang near did. I was waiting in line to talk to him and get a selfie with him, and I was kind of like wanting to chat. And when I saw him when it was my turn, I was like, how's it going, Chief? How you doing? How's it going? Because I didn't want to shock him out of nowhere because but yeah, I'm a hugger.
Yeah, Forrest is a little more reserved than the average. There's a question in the chat. If I am a Christian, no, I'm not a Christian. I am an atheist, or I guess non-believer will be. I don't know. I thought since when I first started in this deconversion process, I call myself a staunch atheist. But the more I learn about humanism and different ideas, I'm more of a secular humanist than to just. Obviously, I'm an atheist in the sense of like I don't see enough evidence to believe in a god. But like, what do you both of you call yourselves? Do you have a specific? Do you go by atheist?
I'll let Richard take it. Go take it first. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm not a labels person. I generally don't label myself. When somebody kind of asks the question, do you believe in God? My immediate response is always, which one? and I don't, the thing is, a lot of people who believe in God think that's a glib answer, and I don't mean it glibly. It's a deadly serious question because there are so many theological versions of gods that I need to know which one. Some of them I'm not convinced exist. Some of them I think are impossible to exist. Some of them I think are just downright silly. And I need to know which God you're talking about. If you are a believer in a God and you are asking me, do you believe in God? I need to know which God you are asking me about. So it's not a glib response at all. It's really, really serious. That's a really serious question. And I'll answer if you give most people, by the way, when you ask them that, if they believe in God, very, very few of them actually give you a detailed kind of breakdown of what they mean. Sometimes it's very hard to answer, even when because someone might say, well, God is love. My God is love. Well, what's that mean? I don't know what that means. You're going to have to elaborate a little.
It's like tautologically incoherent.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really important, I think, to ask that question to people. Regarding the traditional tri-omni Orthodox Christian God, I don't think it can exist in reality. I think the problem of suffering is a real problem for that God's existence in reality. And I've never heard a coherent answer to that. And I've had many conversations over many decades with people who've tried to give an answer to that, and I've never heard one that I found satisfactory.
I love that some kind of Dickie in the chat said, but not a labels person. Is in and of itself a label. So I love it. So I love linguistics, but nonetheless, I'm in the same boat as Richard. It's definitely when someone says God, I know that depending upon where I am geographically speaking, they're likely, they're referring to that local God, that cultural God they're talking about. Here in America, it's going to be the Abrahamic Christian biblical God. And it's still, it's still like, but what version of that God? Because even of the Abrahamic biblical Christian God, there's multiple variations of that God as well. They're not equal across all denominations. So we have to parse these things out. I very much kind of slide towards the agnostic, atheist, idea. And the concept in and of itself is linguistically shallow, in that we have to understand what we're talking about, what we're referring to, before we can even address it. So like saying that I believe in a God concept, when the God concept, there's no like concrete way to define this thing, or someone like doesn't believe in it, it's like what, like it can almost be incoherent in that respect, because it itself is a concept that is defined by whatever the individual is willing to saddle to that concept. Just like the God is love, love is God, God equals God. It doesn't actually say anything. So we need to have more details. We need more information in order to justify that. And depending upon whether it's a logically inconsistent God, like the Abrahamic biblical Christian God is logically inconsistent, or it's a logically possible one, but it's unfalsifiable, your position can change, and you're justified in taking an I don't know. But either way, I agree with Richard on this, is that no theist has yet been able to demonstrate that a God exists as a concrete entity independent of human minds without begging the question. Therefore, until someone does, you could say it's unfalsifiable or it's logically inconsistent, therefore it doesn't exist, but belief is not rationally justified. Is typically where this ends up. It's like, you don't believe in a God. It's like, which one? Is like, they describe what it is, you break it down, and you realize there's no rational justification. Even if classical deism were true, sure, it's logically possible, but why would you accept it as being true when there's no evidence to indicate that it is, when we can't confirm that? So I would ultimately say it boils down to, it would be irrational to do so until evidence is proven, until evidence is presented that would demonstrate it. Otherwise, for the sake of conversation, I typically take the strong atheist position in regards to the Christian God, but that can change depending upon which one we're talking about.
Well, you could convince me otherwise if you had enough good evidence.
Sure, yeah. It's what Schellenberg referred to. Yeah, it's what Schellenberg refers to as non-resistant non-belief. Is like, if you have evidence to present something that indicates that a proposition about reality is true, then that merits exploration. If you have this, like some predictive model or an explanatory model, something that gets us further in our understanding of reality. But if someone can't provide that, if they're simply making a proposition based upon their subjective internal experience, then what do we have to go off of? Sure, that may be their interpretation, but then the only thing we have to explore is why they are interpreting it that way. And that requires, a level of, I would say, some stomach to challenge your own positions, which I think is really, really important. One of the, why I'm so staunch on this, Richard, I think a little bit harder than you, is because I've noticed, maybe you have, maybe you disagree with me, that the notion of being wrong in this country, or like I say in our society, is treated like a weakness. That if you were suddenly wrong on something, or it's exposed that you're wrong, you've somehow failed in some deeper, existential way. And that couldn't be further from the truth. That being wrong is probably the best position to be in, because that means you have the opportunity to learn more. And so people need to be more willing to challenge their own positions and put their own foundations on the chopping block and expose them to critical evaluation, which I try to open up that conversation with. I'm rambling here, so go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, that was good. I appreciate you explaining it so thoroughly. And I completely agree with both of you. Like, so far, I haven't seen any evidence of any of the gods being logically sound for me enough for me to say, oh, hey, you know what? Maybe those exist. No, like I stand very confident in saying, so far, I haven't seen evidence of that claim. And another thing I wanted to comment on was what you just mentioned about being wrong. And I've noticed that to be true even within the atheist community, right? Like, if you have someone who believes a specific thing, right? Like they come up with a conclusion regarding whatever it may be. And let's say they talk about this and they read a book, or they have some sort of professional authoritarian authority stand up. I don't know. Let's say somebody has a degree in a specific area, and they come to a conclusion based on that education that they have, and they're trying to use the authority figure, their authority of education. I don't know. Is there a term for that? I know there is. my brain is blanking on what it is. Like a appeal to authority, sort of. Right? When they're trying to use that in order to prove themselves correct or to claim that they are correct, it's really, really hard. Even if you present them with enough evidence to show, hey, what you were just claiming, doesn't track with the reality. I know that you may not like the evidence, but the evidence is there. The scientific studies are there, and people have such a hard time at saying, you know what, yeah, I wasn't right about that, because then they have to completely leave behind all of these, I don't know, months and months of work or whatever they have presented to you that was false. So yeah, I've definitely seen that example both in theists and in atheists. So I saw a question in the chat. Oh, okay, somebody was asking what is humanism, because I mentioned that I was a humanist earlier. Well, humanism is sort of like a kind of philosophy that centers around the fact that humans, like it puts humans above everything else, I would say, like human needs, and rather than over supernatural beliefs, rather than anything else. It's just like advocating for using things like science and critical thinking in order to come up with your worldview, rather than using just some supernatural beliefs.
Autonomy is a big thing within it. Individual autonomy, the right for one to, everyone has the same level of dignity, and so the respect of the human individual, and it being paramount, especially in moral considerations. So, I also would say I'm a secular humanist as well. I would say if you were to put me into a camp, I'd say secular humanism would be by far the best, especially when compared to something like something so dangerous, so antisocial as Christianity.
Antisocial. I've never heard it be put that way. What would you say is antisocial?
So this doesn't just fall to Christianity. It also falls to pretty much the vast majority of like religious groups, like theological groups. There is foundationally there are in-group, out-group distinctions that are built into the actual framework of belief, and what it posits that there is automatically at the ground level there is an in-group and an out-group. The in-group are the believers, the out-group are the people who are non-believers, or the people who question anything of that nature. The extent or the extremity of these depends upon the interpretation of the religion, whether you have more extreme ones than you have others. You have some that are more progressive, but nonetheless, at the ground floor, it cannot be denied. There is the in-group, out-group distinction that inevitably leads to conflict, especially when the out-group challenges the in-group, or the out-group seeks equal representation or equivalent representation as the in-group. And that's a lot of the problems that we have today. Secular humanism doesn't present these things, doesn't start with these necessary in-group, out-group, this foundational thing, because it starts from the ground floor that every single human being is equal in their autonomy and their right to dignity, to right to individual dignity. And so we begin by recognizing that everyone is human, that all these that we're all human and we're all coming from the same point. That right there is, there's no in-group, out-group distinction there. We're all equivalent at the ground floor. And then you may find in-group, out-group distinctions generate after that fact when you get into like various like philosophical positions. But those are always undergirded by the equality that we have, which means they are less extreme in how divisive they can be. There may be some division. There probably will be within societies. So societies are dynamic. But if everyone was understanding of that, it would always be like, no matter what AJ believes, no matter what Richard believes, no matter what Blessed Be He believes, or whoever else, we're all equal at the bottom. We're all human beings and deserving of the same rights, representation, dignity, and recognition of autonomy as everybody else. And then we'll move forward from there. That right there makes it just inherently, secular humanism inherently more social than Christianity, which begins on a completely antisocial framework. And then they try to mask that with their, projected humility or their projected charity in order to cover that up. It's like, we're being nice because there is an out group. We're doing this in order to turn the out group into the in group. by appealing to emotion or that's why, as Kelsis would indicate, they target the desperate and the emotionally destitute. It's because those people are vulnerable. And so we see this happening, like, to overcome that antisocial foundation. I'm pretty critical of Christianity and a number of other religions, not just this, is Islam as well, and a number of others, but I don't think it can be denied. So.
No, I agree. And Buddhism and Islam as well, both have that that idea, that the in-group, out-group idea. Buddhism gets far too much of a lenient right.
It does,
especially
it really
in the West. My religious studies background is largely in Buddhism, so I did. If anyone wants to see that, by the way, Ascalon produced a long time ago now. It made me. Ascalon made me. Let's put this in the correct terminology. Ascalon made me come on and do a 1-hour rant about Buddhism, a solo rant, and so that is somewhere on the internet.
I think the closest would probably be Jainism. Jainism would probably be the one that is like, I would say, absent of these, but I just don't have the arms to swing a broom like that. I just really don't. I just don't have that kind of. I don't have that kind of time or energy. But I would say, but all of them, you're right. I think too many of the peaceful ones get too much of a pass. But they're down there. They're down there at the ground floor. I believe X, you don't, and that's where we begin to do our evaluation, which, especially when we're talking about concepts that can't be demonstrated to be true in reality, that beyond subjective internal experience, that's bad. That's really saying my ideas are better than yours. My concepts or my abstracta is somehow more virtuous than yours is, and that's a terrible way to start to begin. And you look at the conflicts, especially during colonial times, Catholics moving west and the things that they did to indigenous people, the Spaniards, and their colonization of South America and Mexico. Our beliefs are better than yours. We're more virtuous than you are. You are over here and we're here, and you can justify all manner of atrocity within that framework.
And that, of course, started internally in the very early years of Christianity, when they were coming up with the kind of theological concepts of the Trinity and Jesus being God. And all this stuff, this internal wranglings. There were so many different ideas within. Up until about 100, Christianity was largely Jewish, and the followers had different ideas. They were different groups, but they were largely Jewish based. After 100, you get this huge influx of Greek thought coming into it. So you get all these, different ideas influenced by these Greek thoughts. That's when you get this idea about going to heaven after you die, and all these different ideas. But the important thing to kind of follow on from what JL was saying is they were disagreeing with each other, and they were excommunicating the people who they didn't agree with. If you had 3 people and 2 agreed with each other, the third was excommunicated. It wasn't just a nice little, let's get together and have a cup of Church of England, let's get together and have a cup of tea and some biscuits and agree to disagree sort of thing. It was, you're wrong, you're out. And that's how Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, as we know it today, and when I say Orthodox, I mean there's kind of 3 main traditions. As opposed to those like the Jehovah's Witnesses, who might claim to be Christian and who Christians might claim aren't. This is how that, Christianity as we know it today came about. It is through these internal disagreements.
I love that you brought up the effect, like the Hellenistic effect on that, because of a lot of people, I found especially a lot of apologists today, seem to forget just how influential Alexander was as he was coursing his path through the Middle East. And people's like, oh, Alexander came through and he did his thing and then he died, and then it was just no. You realize that he was establishing civilization as he was traveling through. There were garrisons and settlements and communities that he was leaving in his wake. And those garrisons, communities, and those societies were all full of Hellenistic philosophers that all spread that to like that. And it was when I was sitting there, I was reading the Sermon on the Mount. I was studying the Sermon on the Mount. This was several years ago. I was like, wait a minute, where have I read these concepts before? And they existed like centuries before this. I was like, this is just this is just Hellenism repackaged for Judaism. And I'm like, this is freaking wild. And you see and I have a list of the philosophers there, but I was like, oh, wow, oh, that's right, because Alexander was there. He coursed through these things, were blended into it. And that's where he's getting these ideas from. So, and then I started looking into that and found like a lot of philosophers out there actually agree with that sentiment, that it was Hellenistic philosophy had a huge footprint in the establishment of Christianity, as kind of like the blending of Hellenistic philosophy and Judaic mysticism kind of brought the two together, and out came Christianity, which was like, I was kind of impressed.
So there's a question in the chat that may be kind of relevant to this conversation. It's from one of my family members that's watching. He used to be a Christian, but now doesn't identify with organized religion anymore. So like he's here to learn. And the question is, was the sole purpose of religion used to divide people? And what was the first religion that was put in place? I don't know if you know the answer to that.
I can posit something. I know Richard's gonna have something to say on this, but it really, really simply, the sole purpose, like the original purpose of religion, I do not hold, historically speaking, was meant to divide people. It was meant to help people survive. There was a survival utility in people coming together under the banner of a common belief and then working towards common goals. So people working towards a common goal or held under the sway of a common belief are more efficient in their duties. They're more efficient in their tasks. They have a goal that they're trying to attain. And so the jobs that they do in trying to progress to that are all done very, very quickly because we have to get it done. And so it's very easy to motivate people when they all believe and are striving towards the same thing. So I think that religious concepts, the idea of like binding things together under these notions, going all the way back to like like primal animism, like 100,000 years ago. This was all a result of us trying to find ways to band together and keep ourselves together into the small groups that we originally were, family groups, societal groups, and then, branching out further and further and further until we came into conflict with one another. So I think there's a survival utility to it in the beginning. And then as we got larger and began to, take over large swaths of area, and then when resource allocation became a serious thing, then it became about controlling, because it is about these people believe the right thing. They control the resources. Here's a justification to go and make sure this other group doesn't get the resources that we need to survive. So there's a survival utility, but like the internet, it's a double-edged sword and it cuts both ways. And as far as like the first religion, that really depends upon how you define religion, because you could define it very loosely, or you could define it like really, really stringently, where you put in all the rituals and all the stuff that goes along with, or it could just be the common belief in a spiritual thing or a spiritual concept, and that you engage in a certain behavior because you believe in this thing. So I would say that if you want to call it a religion, it would go back to the idea that human beings are intrinsically linked in this kind of like spiritual way, the inner fire that we possess, that obviously when we die, it goes out. That's why bodies get cold. And so ancient humans would be like, what is it that generates this internal fire when there is no fire? What is it that makes us? What is it that, and that's where it kind of, and then the people would come along who would posit that they have these answers. It's like, well, it obviously comes from here. They're like the great fires in the sky that we see so far away, whatever, excuses or whatever things were thought up. You could say that bound people together. So I would say it has its roots in at least, 10 millennia, maybe even 100 millennia ago.
Yeah, so I think where we can say, hey, officially in the written record, this is as far as we can go. But yeah, this is a concept that existed before what we have of written records of, Sumerian and Egyptians. And
going back there is like, Mesopotamian, really, Akkadian and like that. I mean, these were polytheistic religions. But you wouldn't say that they were like extreme in the kind of like the Islamic or Judaic or Christian sense. They were much more loose. Then you see that same kind of thing, that kind of middle ground with Rome and with Greece and with so like I said, the term religion there's a lot of wiggle room in that. There's no like, bam, that is what a religion is. It varies, and it's varied throughout history. I think words are polysemous. So
yeah, I was going to add another comment about the division part of the question that was asked, and I agree with you, Jael. I don't think religion was created to divide. I think
Right.
it was created to unite people. But over time, over several thousands of years, the result was division. So it resulted in division, but it was not created to divide. What about you, Richard? Do you have any comments on?
Oh yes.
I'm
First of
sure.
all, and the really quick answer is what he said. But also, I think I think we can see examples of the first kind of examples we have of any kind of indication of this are from about 50,000 years ago in bone art from Europe, where we see representations of animals written, carved into bone. And I think as time goes on, we get this thing, and it's I'm with JL. There's no definitive what is religion here, so I'm going to give my take on what I think religion is. You get into Britain, which is what I study, and I'm writing a book about it, so I've done a lot of stuff on this. You get the first kind of movement in to Britain is from the kind of Scandinavian countries in the Mesolithic period, and we've got no examples, I don't think, in Britain itself, but from those from that movement, from those people who moved, when we have found burials in the Scandinavian countries, they do show ritual, they do show signs of ritual, and possibly even ancestor worship, certainly ritual around funeral rites, ritual around meal times, things like that. So I wouldn't call this religion. We get these kind of spiritual kind of bents around, and I think that comes from trying to understand the world around you. I think when these people were trying to understand the environment they were in, they were, because of, just as JL said, because of the way the brain works, and this kind of survival thing, and recognizing noises in bushes. We've all heard that, about evolution. We heard the noise in the bush. That's how we formed cognitive mistakes. And cognitive mistakes from an evolutionary perspective are really good for us. That's why they're so prevalent within our species, because they were helpful. So we retained them, and we still retain them. But all this time we were trying to understand the world around us. Then we get to kind of the Neolithic period. And what we get in the Neolithic is we get settlements. We get what once were tribal groups, nomadic tribal groups moving around. We get settlements of people settling down, forming communities. And that's where religion proper starts to come in. And that's where the control starts to come in. And it's not necessarily about controlling, like we think of religions now, controlling people to be religious. It's not necessarily about that. It's more about the control of resource. Right. It's more about the control of, prominent positions of land, of resources. And alongside that grows up religion. And alongside that grows up something which, like religion, like organized religion at that time, is a brand new thing to the world, and that's warfare. And these things come about because large groups of people are living together, and there are other large groups of people living together, and you want to protect your resources, you want to protect this land you've got, and that coincides with this understanding of the world. You've now got more time because you've got farming communities. You're not wasting all your time and energy moving about. So you have time for these richer, fuller religious ideas, these stories to develop. And I think that's where we see religion as a blanket statement first coming into being, when we, in the Neolithic period, when we get these communities settling down. Now, as to what is the first religion as we recognize as a religion now, that's virtually impossible.
Harder to answer.
Yeah, of course. It was, a lot of this stuff was around in the Middle East. That's probably where the first religions proper that we would recognize today come into play. In India as well, you get the same kind of things. You get a little bit later, but you get proto-Brahmism, what I call proto-Brahmism, which is all these strands of what are modern Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, all these, the Jains were around at the same time as the Buddha. In the Buddhist scriptures, we have the conversations between followers of or the Buddha himself and followers of the Nigantha. The Niganthas, which were the modern day Jains, that's what they called them back in the Buddhist scriptures. So we know these groups were all around together. They were discussing, they had the same kinds of ideas. They believed in reincarnation. They believed in karma. They just had different interpretations of it. So we get these different, really rich, again, it's these societies that have settled down. They're really starting to think through at this point, these rich ideas. And that this is where religion proper, as we recognize religion now with kind of dogma and set beliefs, this is where these first come into being when these communities settle down. I love it. This is my bag. This kind of stuff.
The historicity is fascinating,
but it is, and we don't know that much about it.
Right.
Certainly, for the thing I'm writing at the minute, which is all about, it's specifically about the religion in one localized area. So it's not widespread. It's very, very concentrated. And the amount of material is so sparse. Just today, and I am not kidding, AJ will confirm this because she has seen my Facebook post. I have just today been in a set of woods local to me and taken a photograph of a rock carving from the Mesolithic period. And what have we got? What have we got there? We've got people coming in and writing. Sorry, I think it was the late Stone Age, early Bronze Age. Sorry, not the Mesolithic. And we've got these people coming in and making their marks on the environment and giving this kind of really, really rich physical aspect to the things that they believe. We don't know what those markings mean. There's lots of speculation, but there's so little information out there. There's so little information about this early period because it wasn't written down. It wasn't like in the Middle East when we had writing and we had these ideas communicated in writing. A lot of this stuff is lost, and in Britain, and we had the Celts, and much later coming on people like the Celts, and you're taking over in Wales and Ireland, and later on in the north of Scotland, in the south of Scotland, and we get this. Again, little understanding. We don't have much idea about what we're going on. And now you have the kind of neo-pagan movement coming on and taking a very rosy interpretation of what they think these people might have been doing and pushing it in this lovely kind of fairy tale direction. And so it's a rich history and that we have to piece together. And it's so hard to piece it together. So it is, I think, at the moment, impossible to say definitively when religion started. I think it's impossible to say definitively what the first religion was. But fuck me if looking into it and studying it isn't one of the greatest things in life.
One thing that you brought up has always got my attention is the effect when we were talking about resource allocation and securing resources for survival, determining who is entitled to those resources, so on and so forth. When religion kind of became a tool for control. And I think that's no more better emphasized than ancient human response to natural disasters. Depending upon where you are in the world, any number of things could occur, whether it be volcanoes or earthquakes or hurricanes or monsoons or tsunamis or even just drought and famine, the famines that come across with that. trying to understand these things, and then trying to determine, and then in the aftermath, trying to determine like who died, why did they die, did they deserve to die, who survived, did they deserve to survive, and then trying to determine who gets resources off of that, like who gets entitled to more or to what. And this allows the individuals, the kind of like you say the powers that be, the individuals doing this interpretation of these things, to declare who gets what in the event of something catastrophic, and how we respond, our inherent emotional responses, our tribalistically fueled responses. I lost most of my tribe. That tribe over there kept most of their people. What is going on? I don't understand this. And then trying to determine how do we recoup, in the aftermath of this. And then the religion itself comes along and says, but I have the explanation. This is why this happened. This is why this person survived. They behaved this way. And so then
it makes you feel fair.
Exactly, to try and determine, how we can do this fairly, and you justify it in a way. And then those people above realize, I can determine who gets what, because the God above or whatever is telling me I can do that. And I think that it just not as a matter of survival, but as a matter of coming back after catastrophic loss, and how we tend to react. Our species reacts, profoundly emotionally to that. It wasn't just take recent events like with the tsunami that struck Indonesia. I think it was in 2008. If you think about that, and the 60,000 people that lost their lives in that, estimated like 30,000 of which were children. It was like 15. I think it was like 15 to 30. Like that. But how did they respond in the wake of that? I remember seeing videos of people screaming on the beach, "Why would their God do this to them?" And then what was the aftermath of that? That's the kind of like notation in history that I think is so important, is like how people regroup after such an event, and how they justify and work through these things. Because that in history, we don't have access to that, but we could, today. And then maybe that would give us some insight into the past as to how we deal with it. I think natural disasters were paramount in how these things developed in human history.
Yeah, and I think it also having a religion, not a religion, sorry, a deity sort of oversee your community, your society, whatever you may have, all of the believers of that deity, takes away the individual responsibility of the person to need to say, hey, this is, like you were saying, right? Like, how do we recover? How do we spread the resources that are left? And it takes away the responsibility from any one individual to have to do that. All they have to do is say, well, the God said so. The God said it must be this way. The God said this is what we have to do afterwards. And so, like, people don't have to be responsible for it. Don't have to feel responsible for it, and to know how to act.
That's why I have a soft spot for the Scandinavian gods. I don't believe that they exist, but I have a soft spot because the relationship between those gods and the people was very much, we're not going to help you unless you can help yourselves. You're going to go out there and do it yourself. This is the world that you have, and you need to go out there and make the best of it. That is what led to, I would call like the age of heroes, and the idea that people who stood up and like faced insurmountable odds to overcome these things and became legends in their own time, is because that relationship was very much, this is the world we live in. Those are the gods up there. They're not coming down to help us, but they will recognize our great feats. Those people who are willing to stand up and go out and do something and actually make stuff happen. That's why I love that idea. And this is totally like off the, but Richard, I'm sure you're familiar with the animated Beowulf film that came out in the early 2000s. There was a line in there that Beowulf says that there are no more heroes. The age of heroes is over. The Christ God has killed it, because it took the responsibility for our future. The religion took the responsibility of our future and took it out of our hands and put it in the gods and put it in like Jesus's hands. And now we don't have to worry about it anymore, because God will save us all. We don't have to go out and actually do anything ourselves. So we didn't have to be heroes anymore, because it's all going to be okay in the end. And it was the idea of an old warrior lamenting the changing of the guard, kind of like, as time progresses. And I always found that fascinating, how they looked at as Christianity's influx was coming in. The idea that the change, there's such a drastic change in their culture, and it always fascinated me. As far as the history goes, I think it would be really kind of neat.
Yeah, and I think the question that originated what what was asked, right? Like whether which religion was the first one. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I think the person that was asking to in order to determine whether Christianity was one of the first religions, and we can for certain say that it was not.
No.
100% definitely not. Not
No,
Christian.
that was a great question. Yeah, I always appreciate questions from people anyway, but that was a good question overall. But one of the great things about these conversations is because someone says something and your mind goes off in a million different directions.
Oh yeah.
And I think what we've got to bear in mind, when we're talking about, something Jael brought up, which was this idea about God's, being responsible for natural disasters. We get this pushback a lot from Christians, or this claim from Christians that early Christians were very, very persecuted. And they were. But for a large part of that, they weren't persecuted because they were Christians. They were persecuted, as was any group who wasn't part of that old God regime, because they were around and they were preaching these non-traditional gods, and natural disasters were happening. So they were persecuted because they were seen to be angering the gods. They weren't persecuted because they were Christian. And this is something which is so often overlooked when in these conversations, that people don't quite grasp that subtlety. And I think it's a very, very important subtlety to kind of throw out there.
The letters between Emperor Trajan and Pliny the Younger were really illuminating to me, because it wasn't about disciplining Christians because they were Christian, or manhandling them because they were Christian. It was because they were viewed as a group that did have extremist views, but because of that, it was how they behaved. It was how they behaved in the marketplace. It was how they behaved. It was their intersocial behaviors. And because they were so disruptive to everything, they were causing all these problems in the public square. You got people complaining, it's like, oh, these guys, they keep messing with us. So you got to go to the government and be like, we got to get these guys under control, because they are causing nothing but problems wherever they go. And they're off-putting, and they upset people, and they're disrupting, the marketplace. What do we do? And that's why Trajan was like, look, and I call it the 3 strikes rule. You give them 3 opportunities to come around and change their behavior, not what they believe. Even Emperor Trajan was very much like, okay, they believe what they believe, that's fine. There are many groups out there that believe many disparate things, but you got to behave right. You got to act right, in society. We have rules here, and if you keep upsetting those rules, there's going to be punishments. If you believe what you believe, that's fine, but if what you believe if you think that gives you a blank check to just go out and break the law and be disruptive, that's going to be a problem. It's not because they were Christian, it's because of how they were behaving. And so, there's a very good point you brought up there, Richard. It's not because, I think the only one who ever legitimately persecuted Christians for simply being Christians was Nero. I think would be the only one who legitimately went after them because they were Christians. It was Nero. I'd say that he's the one who did that. So those guys, I'm upset with those guys. But otherwise, it was pretty much just trying to keep the peace.
And that was largely because his second wife's, I think, I'm not sure, it was one of her relations. It may have been a brother. I can't remember. I'm not a biblical scholar, people, so don't quote me on any biblical shit I throw out there. I think it was Nero's second wife. One of her relations really, really had a bent against Christianity and kind of put it in here, and she influenced Nero in a lot of that. Now, some of it was down to Nero just being a fucking whack job.
Oh, complete psycho, just complete
But we can't take away from that. Anyway, I have been talking for a long time. I think Jael's had a few things to say. AJ, throw us some of your thoughts out there.
I don't know. I had a lot of thoughts, but I was trying to see how to guide this part of the conversation into the consciousness conversation.
Oh, we can just jump into it. We can just go into it. Boom! It's on the table. Consciousness. Bam.
Right. Okay. There you go. I could start with each one of you explaining like what is your position on the consciousness arena. Like, are you a physicalist? Are you a dualist? What each one of you, whoever one wants to go first.
I think it's a good question. That is what I think. Somebody mentioned qualia earlier in the chat, so I'm glad we've got onto consciousness.
Let me ask you this, Richard. Would you put yourself in the Chalmers camp, or would you put yourself in the Dennett camp?
Leaning more towards Dennett, but maybe not. I don't have a. See, I read a lot of stuff on consciousness, and I read a lot of great ideas, and I get pulled and pushed, and in every direction. I'm certainly not in the Chalmers camp. Let's put it that way. Let's get that out of the door. And I think the problem is not because. And I spoke on this recently. I did a talk in a town near me, and I spoke about this. It's not necessarily because the hard problem of consciousness. I don't think it's a thing. I'm kind of more in the neuroscience. The majority of neuroscientists don't think the hard problem of consciousness is a thing. It's more of a philosophy thing. 70% of philosophers, I think it's something like 70% of philosophers, think the hard problem of consciousness is a thing. Now, the thing is, a large proportion of that percentage also think that consciousness comes from the brain. And here's the problem with the hard problem of consciousness. It is because there are the hard problem of consciousness as a concept, I've no problem with, because we don't know what we don't have a good theory yet about which part of the brains do what. We've got ideas, we've got a lot of good evidence for certain things, but we haven't got a good solidified theory yet as to which particular parts of the brain are responsible for X. Now, that's all well and good, and I've not really a problem. I have got a problem with that because I think we can sidestep that quite easily. But I've no problem with that as a concept to engage with. The problem I've got is that Chalmers, as I understand it, doesn't say that this is a problem because we haven't got a good understanding of it yet. What Chalmers says is this cannot be the case. The physical brain cannot be. And that's the problem.
That absolute disposition.
Because what he's saying is, and the comparison I gave in this lecture I gave recently was that you go back to 1000 AD when there's a belief in Scandinavia that Thor causes lightning. You take this idea that it cannot, and you jump back to that time and have that same attitude. Electromagnetism cannot be the cause of lightning because Thor is the cause of lightning. Because we don't have a full explanation of the scientific theory of what causes lightning, so it must be this other thing. And that's essentially what Chalmers is saying. And if you apply that to any scientific hypothesis, it sounds ridiculous. Yet people who hold to the hard problem of consciousness seem to think this is perfectly reasonable. And it's not perfectly reasonable. It's stupid epistemology. It's really bad.
I think that the asking the question about qualia and what qualia is talking about is essentially, we can ask questions of anything. We can do whatever. I mean, we can say, what is the weight of blue? And I hold that asking questions about quality, what is the redness of red? What is the, that's what that is. It's like, what is the weight of blue? What is the height of orange? We can ask these questions, but they don't get us anywhere, because I think that when it comes down to it, we recognize that we do have internal subjective experiences, and we recognize that not everybody's internal subjective experience is 100% the same. But I hold that that neuroscience has unveiled that there's a reason for that, and that's because no two individuals are biologically identical. That there are limitations to what our eyes can do, limitations to what our ears can do, and so on and so forth. It's never going to be the same. That asking a question about qualia is really just kind of like repurposing a question or asking a question you don't need to ask, because it's literally looking at the end, like how we're biological individuals that are not identical, and then looking at a result of that my cones may be able to take red in slightly differently or more intensely than someone else. And so my perspective of red is slightly different than someone else's. And I recognize that. I see it as a deeper shade of red or something to that degree. Someone else doesn't see that. This is just a limitation of our biology. But people who are more inclined to be metaphysical idealists are inclined to say, well, why is it that way? Why is the subjective internal experience different? Or why is there something of that degree? And so they begin to ask these questions from a philosophical standpoint, not from a scientific standpoint, and begin to try and look at it from a dualist position, or they can go in that direction. But I think it does come from the evidence, working bottom up. The evidence for me leads to metaphysical realism. And so that's the metaphysical position that I take as a result of the evidence and what we can confirm and the predictive and explanatory models. And it leads me up to that. So I would say it's a question that we could ask it, but we don't need to ask it because it assumes too many things in order for that question to be valid, things that cannot be confirmed.
Right.
I think straight up, show me a consciousness that exists without a brain. Show me one.
Yeah, even asking myself that question of, I've shared this before, but like in my own experience and my own perceptions have changed because of the way my senses changed throughout my life. Right, when I was born, throughout most of my childhood, I was completely deaf. When I got my cochlear implant, I was able to hear voices. During the same time, I lost my vision, and then a couple years later, I regained my vision by having a double cornea transplant. And what people don't realize is that throughout all of those years, my thinking, my dreaming, my processing of the world completely changed. I used to be a very visual. I used to have a very visual imagination before I lost my vision, when I didn't have my hearing. Then when I got my hearing, my thinking became very verbal. It's like mostly a voice. And then when I regained my vision, it was like it very, very, very slowly started to, for example, dream in more colored tones, because it had become almost like a black and white sort of dreaming. And so even if you ask the same person at different stages in their life of what it is like to be them, what it is, it will be completely different from what it was before. You can ask family members, like my kid and I both have OCD and ADHD, and but our experiences of that condition are completely different. So it's like, even if somebody has the same condition or the same type of vision or the same type of thinking, it's still going to be a completely different subjective experience.
Right. I think the evidence is there. There's a virtual 1-to-1 correlation and causative factor that we can show. We can make predictions off of this, the way the brain operates. And going off of what Richard said, we don't have that definitive map as to how these things are generated in the brain. Sure, we don't. The level of experimentation that we would need to develop it, I think many people would agree is to a point unethical, because there are certain biological experiments in order to really, really understand these things that we really can't do. Tinkering with the body is one thing. Tinkering with people's brains, that's something entirely different. And I always saw that if we really wanted to develop such a map, it would require Matrix style, where the robots are going in to figure out how we do all this stuff. Like I said, there's a limitation to what we can do there. And I agree with that. We may not ever have a map of it, but it's fine. I think there's enough evidence to rationally conclude. And I think with neurophysiologists that will also agree, there's enough evidence to conclude that it's an emergent property of the brain. Emergent properties are very, very common in nature. We see them all the time, and there is nothing wrong with understanding it as that. So,
yeah, I think, can I just point out, and I'm going to change this very quickly, that we've been talking about consciousness for about 10 or 15 minutes and I've not mentioned non-human animal consciousness yet.
I knew you were going to go there.
That's going to change right now,
do we
people.
need to break down what consciousness actually is? Because there's a lot of people out there, I would say a lot of theists out there, that have this idea as to what consciousness is referring to, which is really not what it is. So, like, what is a consciousness? You know, like what's the differentiation? Is there a line of demarcation between a dog's consciousness and a human consciousness and a chimp's consciousness? Like, where are we going with this? Is it only consciousness if you're only capable of like rationalizing about moral frameworks? Like, well, why? So big thing. So I know you're going to get into it. Go for it.
Yeah, I think.
Let's go.
Right. So we're talking about. Let's start from qualia, because I think this is one of the most ironic things in philosophy. That we get this idea from what the fuck have we just been talking about? I can't remember. We've just been talking about the hard problem of consciousness person, him. He was influenced by a 1974 essay, I think it was, by Thomas Nagel called What's It Like to Be a Bat, which explains that the physical brain doesn't have subjective experiences and that we cannot know what it's like to be in a bat. And I think this is so ironic because when we examine how consciousness kind of works in the world with non-human animals, we find that it's intrinsically tied to the physical makeup, to the makeup of the nervous system, to the makeup of the brain, to the physical makeup, in some cases, of the bone structures. How, the reason dogs can smell so well is because dogs have a certain bone structure which allows that to happen, and that influences their consciousness. That is part of their consciousness. Far from not knowing what it's like to being a bat supporting the hard problem of consciousness, I think it actually goes the other way, because the distinction between species, that very distinction which means we don't know and we cannot know what it's like to be a bat, is the very thing that shows us that the way the physical animal is made up, the way the physical brain is made up, the way the nervous systems are made up in different animal species is directly influential on how they experience the world, on their conscious perception. And that is so, so important. And I will, as AJ knows, and anybody who's ever seen me on AJ's show before, or even heard me talk about consciousness, because I never shut up about this, I think it is borderline criminal, and I don't use that phrase lightly, that non-human animal biologists who study consciousness, who study animal consciousness, are not included in consciousness forums. I think they have to be. They should be. They have to be, because otherwise, what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how many sides a dice have got when we're sat on a flat surface looking at the number one. And we're just missing out so much. We are missing out so much. And there's a couple of people. There's a guy I've been listening to an audiobook recently. It's not about consciousness. It's about kind of determinism and the fact that we don't have free will. It's written by a guy called Robert Sapolsky. And the book's called Determined. He is a neurologist, he's a neuroscientist, but he's also worked on primate consciousness as well. And he has some great insights. And in this book, which I say is not actually about consciousness, he goes into a lot of detail about the physical makeup of the brain and how that informs the kind of way we experience the world and the decisions we make. And stuff like that. We need to look at them. We need to look at them. We need to include those in consciousness forums at every stage, and we don't. And we need to.
You'd think that the Richter experiments back in the 50s, the Richter Hope experiments back in the 50s would have gone a long way to opening that door, to including that data, showing that, I mean, it's completely unethical, awful experiment that he did. And this is, when I mentioned ethics prior in determining, how the brain does things. But anybody who's is unfamiliar with the Hope experiment that I believe it was Kurt Richter performed in the 50s with drowning mice, and how a mouse's ability to stay above water, it showed that given certain information, mice could push themselves beyond their established limits, their priorly established limits. If the mouse itself, the best way to describe this, believed that it had the ability to get out of the water. And so this definitively, what the experiment ultimately showed is that other animals, non-human animals, do experience degree like these concepts like humans do. It may be to a more rudimentary degree, but demonstrating that mice experience the concept of hope, that of something that could potentially happen because they have a prior of it happening. And so that, I think, is an example that took place back in the 50s, and I think that stuff like that should definitely open those doors. But like I said, the unethical nature of these things to try and show them in the lab is so, I mean, how far are we willing to go to try and determine this? And is the question even that important when it comes down to it? I think is something that every individual has to ask themselves. But I agree with you entirely that non-human consciousness does need to be a part of the discussion. That orca in captivity that gave birth. Okay, is it orca? I can't remember the actual like water park they were in, but an orca, a female orca, gives birth to a young calf. They nurse calf. Once the calf reaches a certain age, they then took the calf away to relocate to another park. It was the first time that humans had ever recorded a whale, an orca making a certain sound, and it was these deep, low frequency calls that the orca was making to try and help her calf navigate back to her, because they took the calf away and the calf was being taken away from her. She could hear the baby's calls back to her, and so in the direction that the baby was being taken, she was calling in that direction, trying to help the baby make its way back to her. We've never documented this ever, but it shows that there is a level of awareness and a level of I would say a level of awareness that we were not priorly aware of. And we see these things. Unfortunately, we wind up doing horrible things, and then we find these answers. But it definitely needs to open the door on that. It needs to be more. It needs to be a field that is more open to investigation, that we need to take these things into account, not just this human supremacy, this human superiority idea that it's only ours that matters, and I agree with you wholly on that one.
Actually, Richard and I had a whole conversation with Scott Dickey, who was in the chat earlier, and it was on the topic of animal consciousness and veganism, and whether veganism was a moral imperative, right? And we did agree that it wasn't, but there was a lot of conversation about the different instances where we see things like what you were just mentioning, like where we see animals behaving in ways that we can tell they have some sort of understanding of what was happening, like whether it be being separated from their offspring, or it can be helping a fellow member of their own community get to safety and such things. And I think it really is an important conversation to have, because we do often, well, not often, like pretty much always, look at humans as being superior to animals. And again, I don't think it's reasonable to expect everybody to be vegan, but having those conversations, we can do better at making sure that we're not causing unnecessary harm. that sort of, and I love
I think
having
it
the whole
comes down to
consciousness conversation. Yeah.
that can, I think the moral concern there is it comes down to like how we're doing it. I don't think
Yeah.
it's a problem that humans do it. If you go back, 20,000 years when when humans were, you go back like 10,000 years, not even that. They were here in America, human beings riding horses bareback in order to chase down buffalo. So with bows and arrows, or spears or whatever. So or whatever when humans would do that like this. It's how we go about doing it. Commercial factory farming, commercial factory agriculture. These things are ecologically unstable. They are damaging to the environment. It's not so much a matter of morality. I mean, the moral constraint comes into like how much damage are we willing to do to the planet in order to get what we want or to get the things we desire. That's the big question there. Going out and hunting and doing these things, I don't think so, because when you look at that framework, it's either a human taking down that buffalo, or it's a pack of wolves taking down that buffalo. The cycle of life, the system that we live in right now is a system of predation. It's a system that we live in. It's a system that we acknowledge. We are a part of that cycle, no matter how much people don't want to be, or how much it's like, ooh, it's icky, whatever. But we're animals, a part of that cycle. It's how we go about doing it that makes it egregious. So I'm against factory farming. I'm against commercialize agriculture in the respect that we're wiping out vast sections of the rainforest just so people can have more cows. I'm against all that, but as far as like animal husbandry, agriculture like that, they're part of the natural cycle. We just have to do it responsibly is the whole key.
Yeah, responsible. I think that's definitely the way. So, in the topic of what could I call it, different levels of consciousness? I don't even know what to call it necessarily. Like, would there be even a term for it? Because when we look at animals, we can tell we as humans have a different type of awareness. Like, okay, I need to correct myself. Like, we don't know what it's like to be an animal, but based on scientific evidence, we can tell that the experience is more than likely different for animals than it is for humans as far as consciousness. So do you guys think that humans have different levels or of consciousness? I guess you could call them states.
Yeah, we have different states of consciousness, and I think that's a better way to put it than levels. I think levels introduces this term that we don't really need to use. I kind of broadly, and this is broad, by the way, so nobody's pick me up at any specific point of this unless you have a fundamental disagreement with the point as a whole. I kind of broadly place things in the kind of things that haven't got a mind, things that have got a mind, and then the things that have got a mind which then have a conscious mind, meaning they have not necessarily, doesn't have to be self-conscious awareness, but they have awareness. They can experience pain rather than experiencing something just as a reaction. They actually feel the pain, they experience the pain. So I think all things that are, there are lots of creatures that have minds that don't have consciousness. I think there are lots of non-human creatures that have consciousness as well as minds. And I think that's just a very, very broad way of kind of differentiating between these things, because, levels of consciousness doesn't really mean anything to me. It's, that we have different states of consciousness. We have different states of consciousness. It's very easy to understand this. Go to sleep and you understand that you have a different state of consciousness. And so I think within that, there's also, this is why consciousness is so difficult to kind of, for people to discuss, because we get this thing where we have these different states of consciousness. We have these different states of experience. We all experience it differently. And we have to try and communicate that to each other. When people ask the question, what is consciousness? And AJ has done this to me before, and I've answered the questions. I don't answer that question because I don't think consciousness is an is. I think consciousness is an action, and it is when, yeah, I always compare it to a car and locomotion. So when you've got a brain doing what a brain does, when all its parts are working as it should, the result of that, the action of that, is consciousness. Just in the same way as when you get a car and all its component parts are put together and working as they should, when it starts to move, you get locomotion.
Careful. There's some theists out there that think you're drawing an analogy between intelligent designed things and the brain itself.
They have done many times.
I typically define it, somebody asked me that, I typically define it as consciousness is an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term that encompasses the entire set of mental phenomena. And to talk about it like in degrees, there are degrees of consciousness depending upon what the state of the brain is. And so if the brain has certain structures that are developed to a certain degree, you're going to get different expressions of consciousness amongst different individuals. A koala's experience is going to be given one of the, given the mammal with the smoothest brain out there, compared to human beings and, the wrinkly, blob we have up there. So depending upon surface area and things like that, the distance between your sulci and your sulci and your gyri. So I think it's really, really important to recognize that when we talk about consciousness and what we were referring to, well, at least for me, I'm not going to put everyone else under that, is an umbrella term. That's the entire set of mental phenomena, your awareness, your emotional responses, and your thoughts, your memories, everything that falls into it. If it's a mental phenomena, it falls under that. Some human brains, because of damage or because of genetic failure or defect or like this, or whatever happens, that can lose some capacity for some of these things. I have one of my best friends in the world. My best friend in the world has aphantasia and no mind's eye. Like it's not like he can't visualize things in his head. So, and which is fascinating to me, but that's because of how his brain works. So he doesn't have that aspect of his consciousness that I do have. And so, but then again, there's things that he like, for example, my interpretation of odor, of scent, because I have anosmia. I don't have a sense of smell. So my conscious experience, like that part of that mental phenomena, I don't have the capacity to interpret that kind of sense. Your sense perception is a part of your mental, is a mental phenomena. So I think it just varies by degree. And the more rudimentary you get a central nervous system, the more rudimentary it gets, the lack of capability you have, but it's still a consciousness in that degree because it's still a set of mental phenomena, and I would say that that's kind of how I parse it out from, I guess, from a scientific perspective. Just be like, you got ant brains and ant nervous systems, and then you've got human nervous systems, so, but it's just about what that brain can do,
Right. And I remember seeing a study that was talking about starfish, how they don't have brains, but they have a nervous system, and they've been studied to sort of understand that they do have some sort of consciousness. It may not be exactly the same that we have, but it was sort of an idea of like, okay, you don't necessarily need a brain to have consciousness. You do need a nervous system though. But like humans experience it from the brain, right? Like we know pretty certain. To me, one of the most fascinating states of consciousness is sleep paralysis, because a lot of people tend to interpret that as them seeing something, seeing a ghost or seeing a demon or seeing any type of figure in front of them. And they don't realize that it is simply your brain and your body are not performing at the same level. Like your body is not, normally for the majority of people, when you wake up, your body, your muscles and your whole physical body wakes up at the same time and reactivates at the same time that your brain does. But during sleep paralysis, it doesn't happen. Like there is a gap between when your body wakes up and when your brain wakes up. And so your body is your mind is still dreaming, but your body is awake. And so you're kind of half awake and half interpreting your dream as well as part of your reality. And that's where people come up with these things of like, oh, I'm seeing a person or shadow figure or a ghost or demon that is like at the end of my bed, or that is, standing up right next to me. You may even be able to get up from your bed and still see that. And then there's also the opposite, where your body is asleep and your mind is awake. It's kind of like a different types of sleep paralysis, but we call it sleep paralysis because terminologies, I guess.
Yeah,
pseudocoma, locked-in syndrome is another thing that pops to mind.
Yeah, that's more than likely a one.
Sleep paralysis is caused because our bodies aren't meant to act out our dreams. So we release a chemical when we're asleep to literally paralyze ourselves so we don't do that. And it is, as JJ said, it's that crossover between you essentially wake up before your body's been deparalyzed, and it can be very, very scary. It can be very, very frightening. It normally happens in adolescence. It can carry on into adulthood, and it is, for people who suffer from it or have suffered from it, it can be really, really scary. The suggestion is, as AJ said, that it's where these stories of kind of succubus come from, these hag, witch foot kind of demon things that sit on your chest, and you can feel this weight down. You also have auditory and visual hallucinations, and you see shadow figures and all this sort of stuff going on, and you're paralyzed and you can't do anything about it, and it's a deeply, deeply frightening experience for people. And it has kind of led into this. It's been studied quite a lot, actually, as a phenomena, and it has led into this realm of giving explanations to some ghost sightings, to kind of some alien abduction phenomena, and it's well studied, and I love that. I think.
I think they're cats.
He has met my daughter, as I said.
I think they're cats, is what they are. That's the pressure on the jizz. Like, is the cat? Is like, if you have cats,
the real demons.
You bring that up, Richard, about alien abduction like this, and the idea that the memory of people having the memory or recalling the memory of like figures standing over them, like like that they can't really make out, that they're like blurry, but I have this nightmare like this. It actually is. It may be the brain accessing memories of when they were an infant and they were lying down, and when they were down, and then their parents hovering over them, and because their eyes are not fully developed, they can't really make them out. And if it's dark, or if the light is behind them and they're backlit, that they have these images of these figures like looming over them, like that, and that kind of anxiety may come from that. It's just from I guess old memories that have been accessed as a result of some form of trauma that may be connected. Like if they're looming over a child and they pick the child up and they accidentally drop the child, that kind of traumatic experience is ingrained somewhere in there, and so they their brain connects the two, and that just carries on through like that. They don't know why they have it. They don't remember the context of it, but I love the idea of that. It's just the way our brains work.
Yeah. I have that one. I have PTSD, and like I don't know if this specific image is based on that or what, but like I have a very, very clear memory of. It's probably like one of my very first memories. I don't know how old I was. I just remember being in sort of like a crib and laying there, and then an adult sort of like looming over, like popping over. But like just like you described, it's just like a shadow image. Like I don't exactly know who it was. I just remember that very clear image and sort of like the room and stuff, and it's like so yeah, like that can very easily happen to people, to where they're just drawing upon a memory rather than a new experience.
Right. That's why it's so wild, and I'm so glad that the science is there. But the minute those neural pathways start forming, even in gestation, when those neural pathways start forming, is so fundamentally important to development, in how the stimuli that the gestating fetus has, the stimuli that they experience, and how that informs kind of like, I don't think there's enough, obviously, because we'd have to go into extreme unethical areas in order to try and determine the levels of these things, but we see them all the time, these foundational experiences as a result of the early stimuli that we've got and how the brain interprets them and develops neural pathways. The wonderful world of of plasticity, and how our brain is constantly developing new pathways to interpret to connect to old stimuli, new stimuli, and how that connects back into memory. It's fascinating to me. An
Right.
organic computer that's constantly rewriting itself. So
Yeah, and these experiences don't even have to have happened at times where your permanent memories were developing. They can happen before your permanent memories were developed. There's been lots of studies of children who have had open heart surgeries before the age of 1, like my child, and later you go to the psychologist or something, and they're like, well, they have this mental health issue, and it has been directly connected. I think it is something like 40% of children who have open heart surgery before age 1 have either ADHD or OCD. We got very extra lucky and got both of them, but there is a connection between that, like a very, very clear connection made between the way that the brain develops for children who have undergone that very specific trauma to how the brain develops into older childhood and adulthood. So like it's very interesting. Yeah, and that leads me to another question that I was thinking about bringing up, right? Like when we think about religion and we think about souls and consciousness, and everybody's like, well, life begins at first breath, or life begins at conception, depending on who you ask. And when we're talking of ghosts and demons, we have to be talking about spirits, and we have to be talking about the soul. They all sort of seem to fit into the same category, and it makes you wonder, like, if spirits were to be eternal, like when exactly do they enter the body? Do they enter before you're born? Do they enter after you're born? Do they enter when you're suddenly become conscious? There's this gosh,
is
I don't
the
know what
reason
I
I
don't know
have
if it has a term.
phantom pain because my soul remembers me having an arm?
Right, maybe. And that is another good question, right? Because if souls are eternal, and then you have the idea that you're gonna go to heaven or hell, depending on how good or bad you've been, uh, and this is going to be your eternal soul continuing forever. What does that mean for the past? Why don't we remember before we were born? Where was our soul before we were born?
That question, or that series of questions, AJ, could be a good 24-hour show in itself. I
All
think
right, we'll leave it for the next one then.
one part of that I picked up on was this idea that ghosts are the kind of souls of the departed, because that's not what a lot of people believe. This is bullshit, by the way. Let me get that out there before we start. There is an idea. It's called a theory. It's not a theory, people. It's called the tape recorder theory. And it's this idea that ghosts aren't actually the spirits of people, but they're somehow recorded into the fabric of, whether it be a building, whether it be space-time, whatever it be, this kind of weird substrate of reality that's not really fully explained, because it's not a fucking theory, people. And when people see ghosts, they're just seeing these events being replayed from the past. So not everybody who believes in ghosts thinks that they are spirits of people. There's a very famous story. I think it happened in the 50s. I can't remember. I think it's in the 50s. It's really, really famous in York. A guy who was doing some refurbishment work on some cellar in the city of York. And allegedly saw a whole Roman legion walk through the cellar. And this is kind of one of the earliest examples of this tape recorder theory that we have. What was interesting about his experience, and what a lot of people pick up on as kind of saying that it's authentic is that the way he described the Roman legion was not the kind of normal, and this is non-normative, and this is why it's so interesting. It's not the normal way that people would interpret if they were describing they weren't dressed in red, they were dressed in green. They didn't have the big oval the big rectangle shields. They had small round shields or oval shields, and it was a non-normative way of representing Romans, but it was also historically accurate. Now, this to me does not lend it the credence that a lot of people think it lends it, because they were not, that information was known at the time he had that experience. People are just assuming that he didn't make the shit up and go and do some deeper research before he claims to have had the experience. So to me, it's not very strong, but it's interesting because when we talk about ghost experiences, when we talk about alien abductions, when we talk about things like that, normally what happens is we talk about it from the cultural memory perspective. So there's a long line. For example, alien abductions, there's a long line going back well over 100 years of this idea of aliens being small and either grey-skinned or dressed in grey suits. There's a very, very long line of that ingrained in our cultural memory. And it's the same with ghost experiences. And they vary from culture to culture. They're not all the same across cultures. But we kind of have this shared cultural memory of what's supposed to happen. So most experiences that happen within this framework, which is why something which is outside of this framework happens. It makes it more interesting. It makes it a little bit more interesting. It doesn't necessarily lend it any more authenticity, but it does make it more interesting because we then have this great extra question of why is this happening? Why is this person reporting this in a non-normative way? And there's lots of possible answers to that. They could just have a very, very vivid imagination. or there's lots of routes we can go down for that. I think one of the things in ghost experiences in people who believe in ghosts, and where I live in Britain, I would say that the vast majority of people, even if they're completely atheist, even if they say that the idea of God is ridiculous, I think the vast majority of people believe in ghosts. And I think one of the things I get when I talk to those people, the question I get more than any other is, well, if it's not that, what else could it be? And there's, to me, you think, hang on a minute. Are we listing the candidate explanations here? Because all the atoms in something flying off the shelf, let's discount that there might have been an earthquake that we might not have, was too subtle for us to register, but strong enough to move stuff off the shelf. Let's discount air currents and things coming in which might have blown something off the shelf. Let's just discount all of those and just jump to the extreme stuff. Even the fact that, as improbable as it is, in a physical object, all the atoms could theoretically all move in the same direction at the same time, causing this thing, that is still more probable than the spirit of a dead person who has somehow died and retains all the clothes, so the clothes have somehow died with them, and all this other baggage that comes with it. This is simple Occam's razor stuff. And that question, which is asked most often, and it is the most common question I get asked when I'm questioning people on this.
It's always from the Renaissance. It's always from the Renaissance, like.
Well, it is, of course, and that's another thing. We don't have I developed a series of 10 questions which I sent out about 20 years ago, which I sent out to a bunch of psychics, people who proclaim to be psychics. And they started off simple. They started off really simple, like, why do we always see ghosts at night? Why don't we see ghosts of cavemen? That kind of thing. And they were simple like that on purpose, because I actually had a second layer of questions that came after it. So when the, you know, why do we always see angels? You know, when people see angels, when psychics report that angels and feathers, why are we seeing angels? And there was this second layer of questioning that came after it. And, you know, for example, in the angel example, angels didn't have feathery wings until the Renaissance, until art introduced them. That wasn't a thing of biblical angels. They didn't have feathery wings. It wasn't a thing. So
biblical angels are fucking terrifying.
Absolutely. And we don't get, you know, and when people get beyond that, even if they get beyond that first and try and attempt to answer that first layer of questioning, that simple layer of questioning, by the time you get to the second one, to the second layer, people start getting tripped up, because belief in ghosts isn't like belief in religion, which is, if you, it doesn't matter which denomination, which religion you belong to, you usually have some reasonably developed kind of theoretical gumption behind it. You know, you have this rich storehouse of stuff to pick from. So you think you might be answering these really clever questions, you know, by either philosophical argument or historical data or citing evidence, what you think might be evidence or whatever. You have this thing. In ghosts, you don't have that. You have this really base layer of understanding around them. And any little push really gives rise to this really quick, deep, and usually quite aggressive backfire effect of you know, getting angry and you know, pushing back and not wanting to open up and have a good discussion about it. And that is something that I think exposes that belief very, very quickly as the nonsense that it is. And I think it's nowhere near as subtle, it's nowhere near as well constructed as religious apologetics, because there just isn't that kind of, beyond this very, very base layer of cultural interpretation, there's no substance there. There's literally no substance to that belief whatsoever, and it's not just cause incorporeal.
And I think that's especially why ghost hunters have to go and use tools, like scientific tools, to make it seem more legit. To like, oh yeah, you know, we saw the electromagnetic fields and we saw this and that, and it's like, oh, like it's kind of like an illusionist, right? Like they use wording, like terminology or technology, to make you believe that what you're seeing is true, rather than using your logical sense to like actually analyze it and be like, oh, okay, hey, let's look at the different steps, let's look at the actual background of it. Yeah, what do you think, JL?
So I'm inclined to interpret them as that ghosts are effectively echoes. And what I mean by that is that the way our brains work, predominantly in how we interpret reality, is through pattern recognition. And we mentioned it earlier, is recognizing patterns, type 1, type 2 errors, apophenia, pareidolia. These are important survival adaptations that our brains are capable of to varying degrees. And that human beings as a species have an inherent fear of the unknown, a kind of anxiety about the unknown. So whether it be what's in the dark, or whether it be, death itself, or a number of other things, which is why it kind of like brings these all things together. These things are commonly people have these experiences at night. They have them in the dark. They have them in places that they're unfamiliar with. And if you take this kind of like perfect storm of like natural anxiety, and you have these natural ingrained fears about certain things, and you have trauma, because one thing that many humans have in common, I would say virtually all humans have in common, is trauma to a degree. And that our pattern seeking brains wind up in times of stress, your cortisol levels are high, or times of high anxiety, or in places that you don't know where you are, unfamiliar environments. Our pattern seeking goes off the rails. And so trying to find something to hang on to, trying to find something that you recognize. And so in doing so, especially when you combine that with traumatic experiences, like in the wake of someone's death or someone that you love very much is suddenly lost, people tend to generate these things themselves. It's our pattern seeking brain reflecting our traumas and our fears back at us, and in ways that we can recognize. My favorite kind of aphorism, or maybe it's a parable, if I have to check on the definition of those, is that it's that the haunted house is haunted by the people that occupy it. The ghosts are what you bring to the house. The ghosts aren't there waiting for you. They're what are brought into the home. And that the experiences themselves, once understood and you break them down, you can find that a person who has an experience of what they call a ghost, the details of that experience, oftentimes when you investigate it, link back very strongly to the individual themselves. They only experience something within the scope of their own understanding. And so if they have a concept that is this, and that goes into how they interpret a phenomena, that's going to inform how the conclusion they make, not to mention all of the other stuff that goes along with it, whether there was anxiety in the moment, or there was fear in the moment, or there was trauma in the moment, and how all these things link together in the brain, and whether or not they're convinced of certain things ahead of that. Bias plays a strong role into it. And so I think that we generate them. We create them in the wake of the traumas and the fears and the anxieties that we carry with us every single day. I myself have never experienced one. I couldn't say that. I mean, I understand why I myself, understand why certain people have certain experiences, and these can, when you investigate them, you can break them down as to why they happened. I know that the brain is extremely susceptible to stimuli even when you're not aware of it, because the brain's taking in data all the time. So I think that we create them. We create them and we carry them with us, and then they're reflected in the environment around us because they're something that's in our minds, in the back of our minds, subconsciously all the time. And that's why people see these things. Some people, it gives them comfort. They find comfort in that, and so they see ghosts everywhere, or they interpret them wherever they be. Some people, however, but I think we do it. We do it to ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a
just my
really good
take.
observation. Yeah, no, I like that approach, because when you look at the brain and you look at what the brain does when you're experiencing a heightened level of hypervigilance, or when you're feeling scared, when you're already going in a place that looks kind of creepy and spooky and it's dark, and I don't know, you're alone, or you're with just one person, you don't have a flashlight, your environment is already set to make your body experience that fear, right? And what happens within your brain is that the higher the anxiety level, the lower your prefrontal cortex works, like the function lowers, and so you're not able to do the typical critical thinking and analyzing of your surroundings that you will normally do if you were not in that heightened level of fight or flight situation, right? Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
And that's exactly what we get in a lot of cases of people seeing ghosts. It's literally how the brain works. And this is what I said at the very start of the show, when it said it provides a really good spotlight, a really good example of normal cognitive function. Because the way the brain works, the way we work, is that we get information in through our eyes and our ears and our nose and our touch and everything, our senses. And that is cross-referenced with what in neurology is called the internal model. Now, this internal model makes up most of the world we see around us. We don't see, it's not like we don't see in the way that we imagine we see. We don't see like a video camera. We see snippets of information, and that comes in, and that, the brain makes sense of it based on what we have from memory. And we know that people who don't have, good experiences of memory, who don't have a good internal model, have real difficulty in navigating the world around them, because the internal model is largely what we see out there. It's this what we've experienced in the past, and that's how we see the world. That is cross-referenced with what's coming in on a day-to-day basis in your own home, in places you're familiar with, in places that you expect to be a certain way. If you're going to play, even if you're going to new cities, you kind of know how cities operate. You have a normative expectation. And this cross-referencing works pretty well most of the time for the purpose we need it to work for. But when we're in a situation where we're not familiar with, when we're in somewhere that's dark, in an unfamiliar location, kind of like the setting of most ghost hunts you go on, you get this cross-referencing not working so well because you don't have that sensory information coming in. So you've got nothing coming in that you recognize to cross-reference with the internal model. So you're working extra hard. Now, when you get that extra thing that we get when you go on these things of being primed, that makes a hell of a lot of difference. And priming makes so much difference to us. It's saying a single word when you first meet someone can influence hugely how they respond to you. The people who know these tricks can use it for therapy. In the case of psychologists or psychiatrists, they can use it to defraud people if the fraudsters. And when you're going into somewhere, I always use the example of an actual ghost investigation I went on when I was a skeptic in a ghost hunting team. There was, this place. It used to be a house. It was on the edge of the cliff in these woodlands, and a white lady was said to haunt these woodlands. Now you've got that information before you even get there. You know what you're supposed to be expecting. Cross that with the fact that your normal cross-referencing functions aren't working correctly. Yeah. The way your brain, your normative way of interpreting the world isn't working properly because you've got sensory deprivation on two counts. One, it's dark, and you haven't got all the visual information coming in. The second one, you're in an unfamiliar location, so you've got all these sight and sounds and stuff, touch, sensors, all these other sensors going off that you're not used to, and your brain can't cross-reference this enough, and it's already been primed. There is no wonder that people genuinely believe that they see ghosts in these situations. It's just their brain working as it should.
Yeah.
It is their brain working as brains work, and that is why people in these situations are so utterly convinced that they have actually seen ghosts, because their brain is doing nothing out of the ordinary. It's just doing something hyper, kind of spotlighting the way that it normally works. We all make cognitive mistakes all the time, every day. Every human being makes cognitive mistakes. We just don't recognize it most of the time because it's kind of a normal part of how the brain works. It's not until we get in these situations where they're spotlighted that it seems really, really out of the ordinary and something like magnificent or supernatural is going off.
Yeah, it happens to me all the time. My husband has this police scanner because he does news reporting, and he keeps it in the car. And as many times as I've heard it go off, I guess it's not recorded in my brain, and my brain is expecting to hear my husband speaking. And so we're riding in the car, and I randomly hear that voice coming up, and I respond to it thinking, like, my brain automatically thinks it was my husband speaking, but it was the radio. And he's always like, oh, that was the thing. I was like, yeah, it happens to everybody. And it can happen in such minor ways. It doesn't even have to be anything like super scary or ghost related or in the dark or anything,
One thing I wanted to address is something that was in the chat. Somebody brought up trauma, and I'm not trying to diminish trauma in any way, but trauma is extremely normative. Okay. So I don't think that any one form of trauma should be discounted from anybody else's trauma, because it's all entirely subjective. Trauma doesn't refer to something that is like, there's no like concrete mind independent, position on what trauma, is or ought to be. Trauma is any kind of an experience that is so distressing that it overrides one's ability to naturally cope. So trauma is a part of the internal narrative. Traumatic experiences inform how your brain responds to things. Trauma is the experience of trauma, like what a person considers to be traumatic, is different for all people. Okay.
Well, actually, no, I have to, yeah, I agree with you,
Yeah.
JL, but I have to disagree with, you don't like my music, who's saying that trauma is not subjective. It absolutely is subjective. You can have two people in the same car experiencing the same car crash, and they're going to experience in different way. Like their trauma
Entirely
is going to be
differently.
different. Yeah.
Even, I mean, so it's that we understand what trauma is, like what the experience is, and it's an experience that has a particular effect, predominantly a physiological effect. We also know that trauma is one of the ways that the brain like wires itself. Okay, like wires itself in direct response to that experience. But no one trauma should be discounted in favor for another trauma, because each one needs to be taken on its own merits, because what one person finds to be traumatic, another person may not find to be traumatic. I've had experiences that were traumatic to me, but were not traumatic to the people around me who were, at the time. So it's not making these words meaningless. It's understanding that the experience itself is referred to as traumatic because it has a particular effect, but it's different for every single individual. A person who can have experience A can experience one thing and it not be a traumatic experience because it didn't distress them. They were able to cope with it. But a person experiences the exact same event and that is deeply distressing to them. It's kind of like I've had conversations with people where I've presented a dilemma to them. And one person come away, oh, that's fascinating, that's interesting, and they were able to cope with the dichotomy with exposing this, and they were able to move past it. Another person was deeply distressed by it because it challenged the fundamentals of their identity, and so they were distressed by it. That can be considered a traumatic experience because I've upended their very notion of identity for them. I've seen it happen in front of me. So what a person considers traumatic is subjective to them. That's their subjective experience. And it becomes a part of their internal narrative, how they inform themselves or how they are informed or how future experiences will be interpreted. It informs how they move forward and how they interpret things. It can deal with a loss of trust in some people, but not always. Sometimes it's not a loss of trust. Sometimes it's simply you got caught in an accident or you got caught in a natural disaster. These are traumatic experiences for some people. I've been in an earthquake, not traumatic. I've also been near a tornado, kind of scary, but it's reversed for my wife. My wife has been around tornadoes all her life. She doesn't find them particularly, distressing. But the first time she felt an earthquake, it set all her nerves on edge. She'd never felt the earth move like that. So it's different for everybody. And so we have to take them piecemeal. That's why therapy has to be cut specifically for the individual. And it can't be just a blanket thing, a blanket approach to every single person, because it's never the same. But it is a part of our internal narrative. It's a part of our internal structure, if you will, our neurological structure informs how we move forward. I didn't want to come off like I was diminishing trauma, but recognizing trauma for what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think regarding trauma, I think there's another very, very important point when it comes to having experiences and having had trauma and experiencing things. There's a really good paper from Strange and Takarange in 2015, which is called Memory Distortion for Trauma Events, the Role of Mental Imagery, which was published in the Frontiers of Psychology. And trauma memories are malleable and prone to distortion. And there's growing evidence from both field and lab-based studies, and I'm reading this directly from the paper, to suggest that the memory distortion follows a particular pattern, and that our own research suggests that the likely mechanism underlying that distortion is a failure in people's source monitoring. After a traumatic experience, intentional remembering, which they call effortful retrieval, and unintentional remembering, which they call intrusive mental imagery, can introduce new details that over time assimilate into a person's memory for the event. So it's really important to understand that trauma events themselves can be changed, and and we can misinterpret them, we can misremember them
Oh
over
yeah.
time. And because we have this idea that trauma events are, so clearly remembered because of these big moments. That's not what the research shows in every case. And as nice as it'd be if and as easy, to make it more easily treatable, if that was the case, we've got to acknowledge that it's not, unfortunately, always the case. And this is why, dealing with trauma events, treating trauma events can be so difficult, because it's not just a simple case of identifying and getting to the bottom of it and saying, no, that's it, now you're cured. It's a case of saying, we might not actually be able to get to the source of this. Let's deal with it symptomatically. And that's how a lot of trauma events are dealt with. They're dealt with symptomatically rather than getting to the source of the problem and curing it.
And I think it is important to realize that trauma, that when people think of the word trauma, they immediately go to like getting beat up or being in a car crash. And that is absolutely, that is trauma. Okay. That is traumatic. That is an experience that can lead to trauma. Trauma is not the event. Trauma is the scar that the event leaves. All right. And so, like I said earlier, two people can experience the same exact situation, event, or incident. And one of them can leave traumatized and one of them can leave not traumatized, because it did not leave them a scar that leads to that trauma. If you have, let's say, two people that witness an attack, right? And one of them is an emergency medical professional, and one of them is a completely random person who has their own past experiences that leads to witnessing that, causing them trauma. But the emergency medical person is so used to that type of stuff that it's just another day for them. They're not going to leave traumatized from that situation. It may, but generally speaking, they don't. So it's a very different thing. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
This is important because you don't like my music is bringing it up like then it means nothing. Everything is subjective as a pretext for anything. It's like, no, it's not that everything is subjective. It's experience is subjective. Subjective meaning that it's subjective to the individual. It is stance dependent on them. So mind dependent upon them. Every individual subjective internal experience is different from everybody else's. And so what one person finds, or what one experience that can result in trauma to an individual, does not necessarily mean that it will result in trauma to all people. That would be a fallacy of composition to assume that. There are people who go through war, okay, who go to war and spend time in combat zones that don't wind up suffering from PTSD, that
Correct.
don't wind up with these kinds of problems, but many that do. Okay, that's because of the experience that they had and how their brains internalize that. It's not a one size fits all. Trauma is not something that you can simply say, this is what qualifies as trauma. And there's not in a biological setting, in a trauma center for like an emergency room. If they are a trauma center, they're dealing with life-threatening damage to a person. A person comes in, that's a trauma. Is because there is damage to their physical body that is life-threatening. That classifies as a trauma. And then there are grades of trauma. But we're talking about psychological trauma, okay, or emotional trauma in that respect. What qualifies an event as being traumatic to an individual is the resulting effect on their physiology. It's like the effect on their brain, the effect on their emotional states, the effect on their ability to reason, the effect on their ability to cope. That's how we classify these things. Some things can be mildly traumatic. Some things can be, devastatingly traumatic. The death of a person, or, like how I reacted to the death of my father, to how I reacted to the death of my dog Jingles. Okay. both of them can be considered traumatic events, but do they overwhelm my ability to? So I would not say that either one of those were deeply traumatic to me. But I know some people out there, they lose a loved one and they are completely floored and they are rendered incapable of doing anything as their brain, tries to kind of in a sense, consciously metabolize the event that took place. That's why it needs to be addressed individually and not as a blanket thing. There's not like one thing, because you may think that offending somebody is not a traumatic experience, but you're speaking for the person who is having these things said to them. Their experience could be traumatic because it upsets them. Like there's the what was it? I can't remember the name. And Richard, you may know this. The guy who it was the individual who found out that the vast majority that atoms are mostly empty space. And suddenly one morning when he woke up in bed, and then he went to get out of bed, and he had this sudden irrational fear that by virtue of how atoms are composed, he could fall through the floor.
I don't
because
know
it's an anecdote that's been around for a long time. But the idea was new ideas can be traumatic because they can upend your understanding of reality itself. New ideas can be traumatic to some people. It just depends upon how they cope with them.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. It's subjective to the individual. There is no objective mind independent standard.
I do want to just pick up on one thing AJ said, and it's not that I don't disagree with you. I just think and I think you will agree with what I'm about to say.
I'll try.
That first responders tend not to have. It's not just that they don't, they've experienced this stuff a lot, so they don't suffer trauma. They've been trained intensely for this information, and they have access to regular therapy to help them deal with trauma. It's not that it's not just a black and white chess game of, well, I'm a first responder, I don't suffer trauma. It's the fact that they have access, or certainly in my country, they have access to regular therapy. They have intense training, which makes them aware of what they're going to be facing before they face it in a lot of cases. So it's not just as simple as, well, they don't suffer trauma. And I think that's what you meant.
I agree with what you're saying, and I probably did word it one. It was more like, it was more in that sense of like, okay, they have their past experiences have prepared them to not experience the level of trauma that someone who was completely unprepared will face in the same situation. Like I know because my mom is a nurse, right? And she did experience sort of the pain of losing a patient, and she experienced having to go home after a long day of taking care of somebody who's really sick. But the difference is that nurses do have that extra training. They know to be prepared. They have the access to the therapy. So let's say we have three people in an experience that I've experienced myself. We have my child who had open heart surgery. Then there was the nurse that took care of them. And there was me sitting by the bedside and, kind of being completely helpless and not knowing what to do. And I was diagnosed recently with PTSD stemming from those situations of like the medical trauma that my child experienced and my own medical traumas, which is a separate thing. And so it's like the nurse and my child is going to experience obviously the highest level of trauma because they're the one that experienced the open heart surgery. Then it's going to be me, who's like my very first time experiencing something like that, watching a child so young undergoing like a less than 1 year old experiencing such a traumatic such a distressing situation. And then you have the nurse who is more experienced and she knows what to expect, and she's goes to therapy and all of that. So it's like, the levels are going to be completely different. The event is the open heart surgery, but it's not the trauma. It's how each individual experiences it individually separately. So
so it's not to diminish trauma, not to say that one person's trauma is more valid than anybody else's, is that we address trauma as it comes, and different experiences are traumatic. That's why it's really, really important for therapists to not walk into the idea of like therapy with the idea that this is what qualifies as trauma, and what you're feeling is not really traumatic. You imagine a therapist telling someone, like a psychiatrist or a psychologist telling someone, well, what you're feeling isn't really traumatic. That doesn't play at all. That would be beyond the pale unethical. Each individual's experience has merit, and it's all on their terms. How they interpret it is how they interpret it. It could be traumatic for them, even if I can't even conceptualize that, how could this possibly be traumatic? But it can be. It's not to diminish the term traumatic, to diminish the term or diminish anybody else. It's to recognize that it is different for everybody. So it's not a diminishing way of looking at it. It's an elevating way of looking at it to ensure that we're taking care of everybody the way they need to be taken care of. Okay,
Right.
That's the point of that. It's not to discount anybody's. It's to recognize that yours is, and I mean, this may sound mean, your trauma is no different, nor more important, nor less important than anybody else's trauma, or the things that you call traumatic to you. The experiences you refer to as being traumatic are no different, no less, or no more important than someone else's experience that they consider traumatic. So it's the important way to go about that.
Right, like don't discount somebody's experience of saying that they feel traumatized by something, even if it may seem minor to you.
Remember, the key is to not tell somebody what their internal subjective experience is, because you are not the one having the experience. Which is why when someone tells me, going back to the concept of like whether it's ghosts or it's aliens or it's Jesus or angels or whatever, someone brings to you their internal subjective experience. Say, this is what my internal subjective experience was. It's like, great, you had that experience. Now let's examine why you interpreted it that way. Not tell them, no, that's not what you experienced. That's antisocial, because they could have, their brain is literally interpreting the experience in a particular way. You can't stop their brain from doing that, but you can give them tools, and we can go down a path of inquiry where we examine why they interpreted it in that fashion. Okay, so sometimes the conversation that we're having about God and about angels and demons and UFOs and aliens and all like that, sometimes is a form of therapy, because it's about recognizing why one is reasoning down a path that they're reasoning, and say, could I be reasoning down a better path? Am I missing tools in order to do? And this is all dealing, all goes towards coping mechanisms to that degree. So it's all kind of intertwined in a way in how we interact with one another. But the first step is not discounting someone's internal subjective experience just because, you disagree with it, or because even if that it's like a person with schizophrenia, those voices aren't really there, but for them they are.
Right.
So
And
really important.
this goes hand in hand with like when somebody reports a let's say a crime. Like you have to start at the point of believing it, and then you go like, oh, okay, what exactly happened? And you go from there, and you respond in an appropriate way. It will be the same thing. Like if somebody tells you they feel traumatized, or that, well, you wouldn't necessarily go in and say you're traumatized, but like if you have an evaluation by a professional and they tell you that you have some kind of trauma, then that's how you can evaluate, okay, what kind of trauma is it, what can we do? And it's going to be completely different if you are like this person is saying, if you're starving, it's not the same as being offended. Right? And it's not, and nobody is saying that it is, but we are saying that both things can have an effect on someone.
Yeah.
And you're going to treat them differently, but you may end up having to call them the same thing, because they both can be traumatic experiences. And I think being offended, it may be different than like, yeah, I don't know if we will call that trauma, but like if somebody is being constantly bullied, right? If you bully someone or offend someone to the point of bullying them, to the point of them wanting to take their life, that is traumatic, right? So
like AJ said previously, the experiences themselves, the experience in a vacuum, these things are different, but how the brain interprets them and how the brain deals with them determines whether or not the experiences were traumatic for those individuals. So it comes down to the subjective internal experience of the event. The events are different, but the experiences and what comes from that is how we determine whether or not a thing was traumatic for an individual. That's the key. So,
and that's why we've got to be so careful when we're speaking to people with different views to us, because we have a responsibility in conversation. It doesn't mean responsibilities as we are as educators, but a responsibility on a day basis when we're talking to somebody, not to dismiss their lived experience. And this is why these I've been lucky. I've been doing this for a very, very long time, and I've had, one of the greatest things that really encourages me to keep doing this when I feel down and don't want to do it anymore is getting those messages from people saying, you know what, you've really, really helped me. You've really helped me get through this thing that I was having trouble with. And it's such a positive kind of notion that you've really helped on. And the compassion plays a large part in that. Letting somebody be their authentic self, even if you don't agree with them, even if to you the ideas that they believe in are so, they might be batshit crazy to you, but to them they are real lived experiences, and you've got to approach them as that. And
it's how we bridge the divide.
It is, and I think it is so important that we keep that in mind when we're talking to people. That's not to say when you get some of these, shall I name names? Shall I not name names? Fuck it. On Tangelo, and people like that.
Oh, yeah, you can. We all go for this.
I'm not going to approach that person.
Not when I'm taking a drag, man.
In the same compassionate. And it is Otangelo, not Ontangelo. I used to get his name wrong all the time, and I used to get corrected by one of my friends all the time about it.
My name is Otangelo. Thank you very much.
The first time I spoke to him on a call, in fact, possibly the only time I've spoken to him on a call, was on Ethan Michael's The Perspective, and I'd heard many of his calls before I spoke to him. And I was very, very clear from the outset, not to be taken as some kind of little, because, you've got a British accent, you're going to be a pushover. Don't take me as that, because I'm not gonna stand for any of your shit, mate. And I held him, I really pushed him, and it was one of the harshest I've been with anyone. And it's because he's coming from a place of insincerity. Yeah. And that's not what we're talking about. When there are people out there who are coming from places of insincerity, that I don't think we need to, take as their being their authentic self, because they're not. The bullshitters and the grifters, a lot of these people. And I think it's very, very important to be able to say, look, sometimes this isn't the way to deal with people. What I'm talking about is, for the most part, for the most of the people you talk to who are wanting to come in and have a genuine conversation with you, even if they have such massive, massive differences of, believing things that you don't believe, treat them as being authentic. Understand that what they believe they're experiencing to them is true. And that's where you begin the conversation from. You accept people for who they are. And that's where the really, really good conversations, where not a voice is raised, where not a harsh word is spoken, comes from. When you have those really authentic conversations, they're the best. I love those.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry, I was looking at the time. I didn't realize we've already gone over 2 hours. That went by very, very fast. And we barely touched the consciousness topic. We didn't even go into philosophy. So I guess we will have to have a next time for sure.
Yeah, that's the issue there. I mean, just to touch on it, not to draw us out like that, but it's going to come down ultimately, individuals who go for the hard problem of consciousness, that they're positing for a very idealistic frame of view, a very metaphysical idealist frame of view. The problem is that when it comes to metaphysics, there's no way to determine one metaphysical position is true over one another. It's metaphysics. That's the whole point. It's like literally the nature of things, So I think the best way to go about this, and the reason I'm the position that I take, is whether or not an individual works bottom up or top down. When individuals work top down from a metaphysical position and they begin interpreting things down, that leaves them prone to bias because they're trying to fit the evidence to match their metaphysical position that they're assuming is the case. I say start at the bottom. Your basic first step is an observation, and then you work your way up through the methodology that we've developed to come to a metaphysical position. But that means that should new evidence be presented, that your metaphysical position can change in response to the evidence that helps us to understand what that comports with reality, depending upon your philosophy of truth. And so that's what's important there. Starting with the idea that there is an aspect of consciousness, or consciousness in and of itself exists independently of the brain, is really problematic, because then you have to work down and then you have to reconcile now there is no methodology to confirm that. So the only reason you're doing it is to validate the metaphysical position of idealism, that things are fundamentally conscious, that consciousness is there. You're trying to validate that. So top-down thinking versus bottom-up thinking, I think, is the most important thing. You start at the bottom, work yourself up, work your way up to what could potentially be a metaphysical position, and then allow that to change should new evidence be warranted. That's the key. I think that individuals, now I know that Chalmers changed his position. He changed his mind later on once he was presented with a lot of the rebuttals. He kind of oh yeah, he was right. But individuals who hold to that, is because they're working top down. They're trying to justify either an intuition or some sort of idea that they find is validating in some way, that of a metaphysical position that they like, and then trying to fit everything into that scope of thought. When metaphysics should be extremely open. It should be something that is very, very fluid, because the evidence is what we have access to, and that should lead us to the conclusion. I think more people should be kind of that's why I am where I am. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I think that's the best way to go about it as far as epistemology goes.
Yeah, I do as well. And and this isn't just the kind of I've talked to atheists who have master's degrees in epistemology, who will this is why when I speak on this, I will criticize philosophers who tell the people they have master's degrees in things, and who will talk about, look, there is a really authentic way of epistemological reasoning where you kind of just say this isn't true, and then work top down, or this is true, make a claim of something and work top down. The kind of opposite of Bertrand Russell's kind of thinking, and his scientific epistemology. And I think that's not a good way to do about this. We don't start, and to put it into plain English for anyone who's kind of struggling with what me or JL are saying, to put it into plain English, you don't start by saying dark matter exists or dark energy exists. You don't just pull something like that out of your ass. What you do is you notice that there is something happening and you follow it. And I use that particular example because we don't exactly know what it is. But we haven't just posited that something exists and given it a name and says it has all these characteristics and attributes. What we've done is followed the evidence. And the evidence for dark matter came along first, in the 1930s. It's a lot older than a lot of people think. And we still don't know exactly what dark matter and dark energy is or does. And we followed the evidence, and that's what we're talking about. That is the best way. It is that's why we're using. I'm in Britain. These two guys are in the US, and we're talking to each other over the internet rather than through prayer. It's because we know that scientific epistemology and leads to stuff that can be predicted and stuff that works. And we know that repeatedly because that's how things work, and is demonstrated over and over and over again in reality, that you don't just pull. That's not to say you can't have an idea, because ideas are great. And that's where philosophy really comes into its own, asking the questions of, is this possible? And that inspires people to create things, but they don't just create things from the top. They start with finding out how things work, putting things into motion, putting that into practice. They go bottom up. And that's how things work, and it's how the world works in reality. And that's how things that we know work and do correspond to reality work, because we do it from the bottom. We don't just pull stuff out of our arse and say, here it is, I've got this fantastic idea, this exists. And that's a really, really important distinction to make for those two kind of methods of working top up, right. Top down, bottom up.
Yeah, can't argue with any of that. I was keeping up with the chat, and Felicia, she is very she's really good at philosophy. Like, I've had some conversations with her before. I would love to bring her on next time. One of you lovely people would like to come and chat more about philosophy and consciousness and all that super interesting stuff. Okay, there's a comment off topic. I just noticed the Jason and J-Hope's closet. I did not, but let me see if I can. Oh, okay, I see that. All right. I had to all right, that is how did you just walk in the room and not think is someone there? Yeah, you probably already noticed that.
I do that. Okay, when I first got him, I accidentally did that once. I first got him, I assembled it and I put it in there and I set it all up. That very night I woke up because I just woke up. I had to go to the bathroom, and my bedroom where I lie down has a straight eye line to that closet. And so when I woke up and was like, oh, I got to the bathroom. And I woke up and I looked and I saw it. And my brain immediately was like, there's so, and I was like, I had that jolt moment where I was like, oh, wait, no, I put it there. That's what that's there. So I was like, even it took me, it happened one time. I was like, yep, I put that thing there. So, but yeah, I love it. Life size Jason hanging out in the background. I'm a big horror fan, as you can probably tell by my office. Is just the stuff that I have around here. It's there's some philosophical reasons behind that as well. Some philosophical and psychological, but yeah, fear, shit like that, Lovecraft stuff like that. But yeah, I love him, big guy.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I know you and I chatted a little bit about your background and your enjoyment for horror stuff.
Yeah.
And okay, yes. Humber said it's been so many years and poor Jason is not comfortable coming out of the closet. That's funny. Any other places you guys wanted to go before we close up the show? I mean, we could go on for like 6 hours, but I don't want
to. The rest.
we could go deep down. Deep down the rabbit hole. Yeah.
What about you, Richard?
I was kind of bummed we didn't getting into spirit stuff like that. How I've never met a theist that can tell me what a soul is capable of beyond what the brain is capable of. And the ancient reasons like this, and how it was getting into the whole thing, like our brain is capable of all things our brain is capable of. They can never identify something that a soul is capable of that the brain itself is not capable of. This leads me to kind of like conclude most likely that the soul is just a way to describe or a way to kind of anthropomorphize our internal, like how like our internal our brain function in a way that makes it seem more important or more special than it actually is. But yeah, if somebody believes in souls, if you can point anybody out there, if you can point to what a soul can do that a brain doesn't, I'd love to hear the evidence on that. That was just one thing that
Yeah,
if you want to
and
explain what a soul is while you're doing that.
yeah, it was like what exactly they say? It was
Because-
like, well, it's this ethereal, ephemeral, whatever.
It's not the thing is there's so many different aspects of, going back to Buddhism again, there isn't a soul in Buddhism. There isn't a soul. There's what we have are what's called the 5 clinging aggregates, and it's those that are reborn. It's not a soul as such. It's these attachments to different aspects of things, and that's what goes through the cycle of rebirth in Buddhism. So there is no soul. The word for it is an anatta, and it literally means it's literally the negative of Atman, which is the Hindu or the Proto-Brahmins version of a soul. That is a thing, a solid thing that is reborn. In Buddhism, you don't have that. It's called anatman or anatta, and it is literally the negation of that. But it's still things that go through this identity that you cling to that is reborn. So what is a soul to begin with? What are we actually talking about when we're talking about souls? Because not every concept of a soul is the same.
right, and that's why I asked that question earlier, like whether is a soul the same thing as a spirit? Is a soul and a spirit the same thing as a ghost? Are they the same thing as a demon? Like there's just so many implications to each one, and they all seem to have, obviously they're different words, we know that, but they all seem to have a slightly different definition of what each one is, and so you can never quite connect them all and say that they're the same. But if you think about it, the concept is of all of them is very, very much the same. So yeah. Why do souls get angry? I don't know. Is that when they turn into demons, I guess? And Ember says a Kia Soul gets better mileage than a brain. Probably. I haven't actually tested. Yeah. I will hope so. I don't know. My brain doesn't drive, so who knows? Speaking of Ember, okay, I'm gonna do some shameless advertising right now, real quick. I don't have I should ask her for the video and all that, but Ember has created these really cool flags and that are different LGBTQ colored flags, and she created them out of images from NASA. And if you go to the website Astral Bride, I'm gonna pop it into the chat so I can put it on the screen. Astralpride.com, and she has like t-shirts and flags and other types of clothing. They look really, really awesome for anybody who wants to check it out. All right, okay. In this case, I think we're probably gonna have to finish the show, so everybody can go and take a rest. But I really, really enjoyed the conversation and would love to have both of you or one of you or either of you or whatever you want to do. But I would love to have you guys back because, yeah, we could go on for hours and hours and different aspects of this conversation. And we can pick next time where we go. Yeah, we'll make it a series or something. A series of serious, non-serious conversations. Anything you want to tell people, like shows you have coming up and your books, your anything, go subscribe type of thing?
I just first of all want to thank JL. It's the first time I've met him, and it's been I've thoroughly enjoyed having the conversation with you. I did want to address something Ascalon said earlier
Okay.
on in the chat, if I can find it. And I've been dying to mention this. Who said, referring to myself, your clothes died in the early 90s, Richard. Correct. You are correct, Ascalon. So yeah, other than that, I'm hosting Talk Heathen on not tomorrow, but the week after. So if you want to call and talk to me, any of the people in the chat or any of the people watching this after the fact, and you want to give me a call on the 17th, give me a call 1 p.m. Central on Talk Heathen, and let's have the conversations. That's what I'm here for. That's what I do. So let's do that. And a great conversation as always. And as always, we could go on forever, as AJ said. JL, it's been brilliant meeting you. It's been brilliant having the conversation with you. Let's do it again sometime and take it further.
I knew you would get along. I had a sense of that you would get along and that there will be no fighting. So good. Thank you for that.
Yes, it was awesome. Thank you.
Okay, cool. What your channel is called Bridge the Divide.
Yeah, I do my own content. I have new content coming up, response content. I have a number of videos I have to get to. Lately, I've been doing a lot of live streams. I host a live stream called The Stage of Reason, where we bring up believers, talk about what they believe and why. We address all manner of topics, whether it be science, philosophy, religion, theology itself, politics, whatever. We talk about it all. And do like review content as well. So like that. So all kinds of stuff. But yeah, if you check out my channel, if you like it, I hope you do. But we do this kind of stuff all the time over there, and we have a good time doing it. So it's very much a stage call. Like people, people will come into the stage and we'll talk to them. So I know, I love that format. I love getting the chance to talk to new people, and so I wanted to do it myself. But I've been doing that more frequently, so I've been doing a lot of created content. But you'll see that too over on my channel. New stuff always coming up. So the question is, am I going to go live tomorrow? Because tomorrow's Mother's Day and we may have a dead stage, but I could either go live later tonight, maybe. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. So, but yeah, come check me out at JL Warren.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you will have people that don't celebrate it, or
There's one guy I want to get on there. I want to get the needgod.net guy. His name is Ryan. I want to get that guy on my stage because his format over on his channel is not conducive to having this kind of conversation. I want him on my stage where we can actually dedicate time to having that, because I asked him for rational justification on his stage one time and he gave me the teleological argument, and I just was like, I figured, and I just walked away. So it's kind of like, but I want to drill down into these concepts. So
yeah, I hate when that happens. It's just like you ask something and it's like a completely different answer to what you were asking. What are you doing, people? Okay, good stuff. Everybody go subscribe to Richard. Go subscribe to J.O.'s Bridge the Divide channel and check out other content. If you're new here, you can subscribe to my channel, and you can also find me on Skeptic Haven every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central on Critical Call. And yeah, I think JL's been on Critical Call before. Maybe not. I can't remember. If not, I'll invite you. Richard, I will invite you, but it is much later. Yeah.
Wherever you need me, I will be.
I think Ember also mentioned that I should do more Truth Wanted. I would love to do a Truth Wanted, especially with Ember. It's just not feasible. It starts at 1 a.m. for me, and I am usually in bed well before that time. So it's probably unlikely anytime soon that I'm doing any 7 p.m. Central shows.
Right, that's exactly the time of my show on Skeptic Haven. That's why I haven't even invited you on it. But otherwise, I knew you would be like 8. No, that's my sleep time.
I'm open to anything, and I'm only 58 subscribers away from 15K. I'm going to plug myself until I hit that, because I really want to hit the 15,000 milestone. So I'm only 58 subscribers away from it. So if you like it, please subscribe. That will really, really help me out. But I'll be wherever somebody gives me a call. Be like, hey, JL, bring your yappy mouth over to that. I'll be happy to do it. I'll do the thing.
All right, awesome. Okay, Joe, subscribe, do all the stuff. Good. Okay, guys, thank you so very much for this show, and we will definitely do it again, because I really, really enjoyed this conversation and would love to see it go further. All right. everybody, thank you, and we will see you next time.